美国联准会主席叶伦近日表态，货币宽松政策还是有必要实施一段期间，能够让热钱从已开发国家再度的回流到新兴市场，甚至带动韩圜跟台币的飙涨。对此，新兴市场投资教父墨比尔斯他是喊出了台股在5年之内还有20%到30%的上涨空间，到了2020年有机会冲上2万点。来看看今天的关键对话。
各位观众朋友，大家好！我们今天非常荣幸邀请到了投资界重量级的人物，被市场称作是新兴市场教父的 Mobius 来接受我们的专访。Mobius 研究新兴市场超过40年，一手掌管的资金规模高达了500亿美元，也就是上兆元台币。而今天他就要来跟我们分享新兴市场未来的走势和看法。我们一起来欢迎 Mobius。Hello, nice to meet you, Mobius. Welcome
Hello.
to Taiwan.
Thank you.
We know that you love travel, right?
Yes, I love to travel.
How many times you've been to Taiwan?
Oh, many times, probably 50, 60, 70 times, yes.
Oh, really?
Yes.
If we look at the Taiwan stock market, we know that this year, Taiwan will hold a local election in November. So we know that India stock market makes a record because of an election. Do you expect that Taiwan will have the pre-election rally this year?
It's possible, but this whole dispute about the trade with China may dampen the sentiment in Taiwan. So it depends on how that's resolved. If the sentiment changes, then there could be a very good rally.
Because we know that Taiwan stock market have risen 10% last year. You still think that Taiwan stock market have great potential?
Yes, particularly because of the strides that have been made in the technology area. We've seen a lot of very good companies with new technology, with technology that's used globally, and I believe that these companies will be the forward momentum of the market, which will be good for Taiwan.
So technology is the most appealing sector in Taiwan's stock market. So that's your opinion right here?
I would say at this stage, yes.
Because before you said that retailing food is better, so you change your mind?
Yes. Well, actually, as you know, food and retailing did very, very well. Now I believe the technology area will do well as well.
But we know that there are harsh competition in the global technology industry. So do you think that Taiwan has great potential to win this competition?
Yes. The combination of Taiwan's technology and innovation with the manufacturing capability in China is a very, very strong combination. And I believe this will be very positive for the Taiwan market.
And there is a really hot issue in Taiwan, that is the service trade agreement with China. One kind of the FTA. Some of the Taiwanese people worry that if our government sign the contract, that will let our industry be affected by the China. So they keep protesting. How's your opinion?
Well, if you look at the history of Taiwan-China relations over the last 20 years, you'll notice that there's been a tremendous change from the time when I was here in the 80s to now. So the relations are much, much closer than they were before. And you must realize also that the success of Chinese exports depends and has depended upon Taiwan. Taiwan taught Chinese how to export. Taiwan entrepreneurs went to China and set up huge manufacturing plants using Taiwan know-how and technology. So the relationship is symbiotic. In other words, there is a mutual dependence. And I believe that this trade agreement is just a natural progression to make things much easier for this trade and relationship to go further. I think it's a step forward. It's not essential because trade and investment will continue regardless of whether this agreement is passed. But it's just another step towards easier relationships.
You once mentioned about that if investors invest in Taiwan stock market for 5-year periods will make good returns in 2011, and now there's 2014. Are you still holding the same view?
Yes, and what I say is that people should be investing in a measured basis. In other words, each month or each quarter, put the same amount of money in the market, and they should do very well. You have to do it in a measured way because the market is quite volatile, but the long-term trend is upwards. So you should do quite well if you do this staged investment.
How's your expectation for Taiwan stock market's growth rate?
Very good. I believe the Taiwan stock market will do very good going forward, and we are very bullish on the trend in the Taiwan market.
Does it have the potential to grow more than 10% this year?
In 1 year, it's possible, but I wouldn't want to predict 1 year. Usually in 5 years, you'll do quite well, at least 20 or 30% over a 5-year period.
We know that China government have done their structural reform. How do you see the change of the China? And what's your expectation for the growth rate of China market this year?
The China market will probably grow, the economy will grow about 7.5%. The stock market will do better, but in a very, very differentiated way, because China is now moving more and more towards a market economy. So you will see failures and you'll see big successes. So it'll be quite different from what has happened in the past.
You mentioned about the growth rate of China market is about 7%, right? So tell us about the China market's growth rate in the next 5 years, because we know that someone worry about their economy will slow down. Do you agree with it?
Well, as a rule of measure, 7%, 7.5% economic growth usually translates into double percent of the stock market. So in other words, if the economy is growing about 7%, then you would expect the stock market to grow by 14%. So over a 5-year period, the China market should do quite well. And you must remember that a 7% change now in the economy is much, much greater than a 12% change 5 years ago, because the economy is much, much larger. So in dollar terms, the China market will do very well.
And what is growth momentum?
The growth momentum is very strong because as they move from state-controlled economy towards more market-oriented economy, you'll see a number of companies do very, very well. Of course, there'll be failures along the way, but if you have the right stock selection, then it should do quite well.
And how about the renminbi? Because you once mentioned that renminbi will once become the global reserve currency in the 5 years. But we see renminbi has its depreciate. So how's your view on renminbi? Will they go stable recently?
Well, if you look at the last 10 years, you'll notice that the renminbi has been getting stronger and stronger on a steady basis. And a lot of that has been controlled by the government. Of course, they've kept a very close control of the currency. Recently, they've allowed the currency to move in a wider band. So this recent decline in the renminbi is planned by the government to again move towards a market-oriented exchange policy. This, of course, prepares them to become a world currency. No, I believe that the currency will fluctuate much wider than it has in the past because of this new policy towards a market-oriented currency exchange mechanism.
And we know that a lot of investors in Taiwan, they are investing renminbi now because they think it is really cheap. Do you agree with this?
I agree that from a long-term potential, it's a good idea to have renminbi because we believe that it'll get stronger against other currencies over the long term. But there will be these fluctuations that I mentioned.
And when will see renminbi be stronger?
Probably next year. You'll see a stronger renminbi.
Before June?
I can't tell whether it be before June, after June, but generally speaking, the long-term trend is up.
And when we talk about the emerging market, we will focus on the BRICS. And yes, we talk about the China, then we want to talk about the Russia. How do you see the Russian market this year?
This year, of course, the Russian market will be depressed because of what's happening in Ukraine. But the Russian stocks are very, very cheap. And if the Ukraine situation is resolved, which we believe it will, these stocks will probably rise again. So there's a good chance that you will see better performance later in the year in Russia.
And how about India? We know that India has the world's second population, and someone think that there will be the great economic potential. But their stocks market have already made its record. Do you suggest investors to focus on the India stock market?
Of course, India, as you mentioned, is a very large population, a very dynamic market. There are excellent companies in India who are becoming globally competitive. So we believe that it's important to be in the Indian market. See, what's happened is there have been a political change. You're now seeing more reform in India. As you know, they have a very bureaucratic system, lots of rules and regulations which discourage enterprise. And now that's changing. And of course, that will add a lot more dynamism to the Indian economy.
And how's its growth rate?
Growth rate will be about 5 or 6%, which is pretty good for an economy of that size.
So besides India, is there any emerging market that will be more attractive?
Many of them will be attractive, particularly the frontier markets. If you look at markets in Africa, in some places in Latin America, and here in Asia, Vietnam, for example, would be one of the frontier markets. These markets are quite interesting.
But what's its growth momentum, like Africa?
The growth momentum is coming from a number of areas. One is inward investments. As you know, China is active in Africa. Many European companies and countries are active in Africa. In addition to the fact that you have a base which is very low. In other words, if you have a low base, the percentage increase can be very great. So that's where you see the excitement in Africa, because they're starting from almost zero, and of course they're moving up and they're leapfrogging the technology. In other words, they're introducing technology when there was none before, and that results in much higher productivity.
But we're still seeing that some challenge that in the emerging market, that is the taper begins, the capital outflow that began happening in the emerging market. And we see that some emerging markets currency have great depreciation. Someone worry about that will cause the financial crisis. Do you worry about it, or what's your attitude?
Well, if you look at the currencies in these emerging markets, you'll notice that a few years ago, these currencies got very strong. They got too strong. Brazilian real is a good example. Then, when there was talk about tapering, the currencies came down because a lot of investors who were invested in the bond markets in these countries exited. And of course, when they pulled out of these countries, the local currency got weaker. I believe that this is actually a good development because most of these currencies had gotten too strong so that they became globally uncompetitive. Now, the currency rates are more realistic. It's much easier for them to export, and I believe it's a positive development rather than a negative development. So in our view, you have to be careful to select those stocks which will benefit from a depreciated currency. A good example is in India, where the companies that are doing the outsourcing, they're using Indian know-how, Indian personnel, Indian staff, and they're exporting in US dollars. So their earnings have been going up very rapidly, and of course the stock prices have done very well.
But we also see that some emerging market government, because they want to support their currency to resisting the depreciation, they raise their interest rate. Do you think that will cause any bad effect in their economy?
Of course, in the short term, higher interest rates will affect the economy. But a lot of these governments are becoming more realistic. They're allowing their currencies to get weaker, and they're resisting the temptation to raise interest rates. Of course, they're worried about inflation. But globally, inflation is really subdued. And one of the reasons is that productivity has been increasing in many countries and on a global basis. Because of the internet, because of better communications, productivity is rising very rapidly. In other words, you'll have maybe a small rise in inflation as a result of higher cost of imported materials, but usually they will adjust fairly quickly to that.
And how about the global economy? We see that Europe, the crisis not really over. How's your prediction for the total global economy this year?
Well, if you look at Europe, actually they are now in a recovery phase. If you look at a country like Greece, they're already recovering. If you look at the prices of their debt, you'll see that these prices have risen. So I would say, generally speaking, Europe is on the mend. They are now on the recovery path. And that's, of course, a very good sign for the rest of the world. And, of course, America, as you know, is now in a recovery. Maybe we'll see 2 or 3% growth this year, which is positive for the rest of the world. It's the largest economy in the world. So that would be very positive. So if you look at the total picture, America growing, Europe recovering, frontier markets moving up very, very fast, emerging markets doing quite well. Japan, of course, is now on the recovery phase, pumping a lot of money into the economy. China is growing at 7%. So if you look at the total picture, it's quite positive.
What's your suggestion for Taiwan's investor to the investing allocation in this year?
Well, the main thing for Taiwan investors is that they must be globally diversified. Don't just stick to the Taiwan market, because the Taiwan market will not always be the best place to be. Sometimes it'll go down, sometimes it'll go up. So you must invest globally. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you must put your money into equities as much as possible. Of course, you have to have some bond investments, but equities are very important for the long-term investor, because equities have shown that they do well over the long term.
And as a father of emerging market, everyone codes.
Thank you.
We are also curious about that. What's your investing philosophy?
Investment philosophy is mainly to look for value, to take a long-term view, to be patient. Don't worry about the short term, but be patient. Once you've made a decision, stick with that decision. If it's wrong, of course, change, but if it's right, then don't worry about the price fluctuations.
And from your perspective, what makes you success?
I don't know whether you could say I'm a success. You know, our success is built day by day. And of course, the attitude must be one of humility. You have to be humble. You have to have an open mind. You have to be willing to take new ideas and change, because the world is changing.
And a lot of people curious about that, your daily work. So what is the first thing you do in your daily work? We heard that you use Twitter every day, really?
Well, of course, the internet is important, but every day I'm looking at emails from various parts of the world, see what research is coming in, you know, what new things are taking place around the world. And of course, reading is important, but more important than that is talking to people and learning about what's happening in the country where you're visiting.
You have a lot of fans in Taiwan. So for a young investor, if they want to be as you one day, their dream, do you have any suggestion for them and how to cultivate a successful investor?
Well, I would say the first thing to do is to travel, look at what's happening in other parts of the world, read as much as you can, study as much as you can. Don't be afraid of accepting new ideas, be flexible. And if you do that and learn as much as you can be successful.
When you are traveling, which part of the country that you will pay more attention to see that whether it have investing opportunity or not?
The main thing is to talk to business people, talk to people on the street, and listen to what they're saying. Of course, read as much as you can about the country. And if you're in the country, it's very important because you get a feel for what's happening, what are the changes taking place, and you must take a very forward-looking attitude. Try to look forward as to what is going to happen in the next years in that particular country. Well, of course, the government policies are very important, particularly taxation and the government attitude towards business generally. If there are too many restrictions, then business cannot function very well. So that's probably one of the most important aspects that you have to at least consider, the beginning. Then you can begin to look at individual companies and see the attitudes of the entrepreneurs, how they're planning, what's their forward-looking attitude.
And do you have any plan of retirement?
No plans.
Oh, really?
We enjoy the work. I really like what I'm doing. I like to keep on doing it. So if you enjoy what you're doing, you don't have to stop. Good thing about our business is that the more experience you have, the better you can be, because you've had, your successes and failures over a long period of time, and then you can become a better investor. So I think as you get older, you can probably be a better investor than when you were younger.
Thank you, Mobius. 新兴市场受到美国联准会缩减 QE 的购债规模，面临震荡。不过 Mobius 很有信心地认为，这波震荡和资金流出只是短暂的现象。他对于新兴市场的未来成长性还是抱持着乐观的看法。而至于台湾的股市，他也是相当的乐观。不过台股会不会如 Mobius 预期有不错的表现，还有待时间和市场的考验。